My topic is strategic planning, how to build Christ's church in the 21st century. There's a key passage here as well as Matthew 16:18, and I'll be referring to it and we'll come back to it a little bit later on. By way of explanation, strategic planning that builds Christ's church specifically involves re-envisioning His church. And that's where I'm going with this presentation today. In other words, as I cover strategic planning, you're going to discover that it's the ideal plan or strategy to take your church through to see it re-envisioned in a time when most churches need to be re-envisioned. Now, I'm going to begin with a question. How is the church, capital C, how is the church doing? Well, the answer is not well. If the typical church in America were to go to the hospital emergency room, they'd take one look at it and quickly put it on life support. So let's examine the state of the church so we can know what we're talking about here. What is the state of the church in America? This will establish the need for strategic re-envisioning of our churches, so that's kind of where I'm going. So let's talk a little bit about the state of the church. Churches all across America right now are struggling big time. One figure is that 80 to 85% of the churches in America, that's around 340,000 churches, are on the downside of the growth cycle. Now, let me take for just a moment and say the growth cycle is the same thing as the organizational cycle. It's the bell-shaped curve. And as you know, when you plant a church, you're over here on one side of the bell-shaped curve, and the idea is that it will grow. But if you don't continue to work at it, if you don't continue to focus outward, if you don't continue to think strategically, then it will plateau. And if you don't address that, then it'll begin to die and it'll go down the other side. And all we're saying here at the beginning is that probably 80 to 90% of the churches all across America right now are on this downward trend. And that's sad, and that's not what we want. And so that helps us to get at the state of the church. Now, I've said 80 to 85% of the churches are in decline. Researcher Tom Rainer sets that figure more at 90%. In other words, 9 out of 10 churches in America are on that downside of the organizational curve of the church life cycle. Simply stated, churches are losing ground in their own backyards. Take, for example, church attendance. Dave Olson has done research in this area. And Dave states that the percentage of the population attending church on any given weekend in America in 2007 was 17%. In other words, 17% of our population is churched, 83% are unchurched. That's an astronomical figure. And we better wake up because that's what's taking place here in America. In particular, though, I want to focus on young adult attendance. The church is bleeding, and it's bleeding fastest among its youth. 60% of young Christians ages 16 to 29 are leaving. They're walking away from the church. Why have they left? Well, that's a question that we need to ask. The reason given is that they don't believe in God or the Bible anymore. What's at the very heart of this problem? Well, I think it has to do with how people view Jesus, spirituality, and the church. When you ask most people how they view Jesus, most of them will say, well, yeah, he was a great man, like Gandhi and others, a great prophet. So yeah, we believe in Jesus. Well, if you ask them about spirituality, they'll say, yeah, if you mean by that a search for some kind of meaning out there, yeah, we're for spirituality. And then if you ask them about what the church and what they think about the church, it's thumbs down. They just dislike the church. Our churches seem to be failing them. The other question, though, that we probably need to ask at this point is, any chance they're going to come back? Well, research tells us that the majority will not return. So roughly of every 3 young evangelicals who leave church, 2 will not return, 1 will come back. And who knows how long they'll stay once they come back. Interestingly enough, when we talk about teenage bridgers, only 4% of the teenage bridger population even understand the gospel and have accepted Christ, even if they attend church. On the other hand, though, there are the cults and the non-Christian groups. The number of cults and non-Christian groups in America, sadly speaking, are growing. Let me give you several examples. Take the Mormons. Between 1965 and 2011, they grew at the rate of 339%. Another group would be the Jehovah's Witnesses, and I'm sure you're familiar with most of these groups. And their growth rate between 1965 and 2011 was 352%. And then finally, there are the Wiccans, who between 1990 and 2008 grew at a rate of 4,000. This is the fastest growing group. These are the witches. They grew at the rate of 4,275%. Now we have another category over here we refer to as the atheists. And they've not been much of a challenge to the church in the past, but they're experiencing some growth as well. They've gone from 902,000 in 1990 to over 1 million, about 1.5 million in 2008. Now, what is problematic for us here is that for 18 to 29-year-olds, there are twice as many atheists as evangelicals. Twice as many atheists as evangelicals. Then there's another aspect of the big picture here, and that has to do with change and the complexity that results from ongoing rapid change. The church landscape is rapidly itself changing and becoming increasingly complex, and the more it changes, the more complex culture comes. Now, the rate of change is almost unbelievable. From the time of recorded history until 1900, information doubled. Then, from 1900 to 1950, it doubled again. And then starting in 1975, it began to double every 5 years, and presently, don't miss this, presently it's doubling every 2 years. Talk about change, talk about complexity. And then there's change in technology. I was watching a program the other night, and it was talking about the camera phone, but it was talking about the role of the camera. And in the program, they said in 1930, there were 1 billion photographs per year. Then in 1960, there were 3 billion photographs per year. 1990, 57 billion photographs per year. And then in 2013, 850 billion photographs per year. This is from Diane Sawyer, ABC World News, October 30th, just this past year, 2013. So the conclusion? Well, the conclusion is not hard to make. America is clearly becoming less Christian, less evangelized, and less churched. Yet most in our churches seem oblivious to this reality. So how about you? And how about your church? Are they aware of what's going on and what's taking place in our country? Now, need to ask the question, what's the solution? Enough, we've looked at the problems, we've seen the bad news. What is the solution? But before I address what is the solution, I want to address what's not the solution, because there's some bad solutions running around out there. And the first is the traditional church model doesn't work anymore. And it's not because the model itself is flawed, it's because the culture has changed and the model no longer works with the particular cultures that we're facing in our country currently. This is also an indication that what got us to where we are, basically again the traditional church, will not get us to where we need to be in this day and time. Third, we can't do what we've always done and expect different results. And as many are aware, that's the definition of insanity. And finally, and get this, past success guarantees nothing about the future. Just because we've been successful doing it way in the past doesn't mean we need to redouble our efforts. It says nothing about what's going to happen in the future and whether past success will be the solution to the future. I think that won't be. I don't think that will be the case. Now, let's get back to the solution. The solution is very simple, and we find it in Matthew 16:18. It's church building. Church building is the solution. So, what are we talking about when we talk about church building in Matthew 16:18? Jesus said in Matthew 16:18, "And I tell you that you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not overcome it." Again, Matthew 16:18, and that is the key to our solution. So, we're talking about church building, but in particular I want to talk about how do we build Jesus' church. And the answer to that is what I refer to as the strategic envisioning or re-envisioning process. Now, what is the process here? Well, struggling pastors will attempt to copy some type of megachurch model because they'll say, well, I'm going to go to this megachurch presentation because look, it's worked for them. And they go there and they try to take that model and they want to come back to small town Texas, say for example. I'm in Texas right now, and they will try to make it work, but it won't work. And it's the very simple fact that the problem with small town Texas is that it's not Southern California. And what may work in Southern California or maybe in Virginia or up in Chicago won't necessarily work in other places. Now, let's talk about the re-envisioning process. We've talked about model. I want to address the word process here. Instead, we need an envisioning process that helps us to design an authentic model that is true to who you are, your church's identity, where you are, your church's geography, and finally, when you are, the times that we're in, 2013. Now remember, and this is key, the process produces the model. We must work through that process, and when we do so, what comes out the other side is a model that is authentic to where we are and who we are and when we are. Now, you're to build your model so that it implements the biblical imperatives that address the church. So keep that in mind as we work on your model as we go through this material. Some of those passages that address the church in Scripture that we need to pay attention to are Matthew 20 through 28, and Matthew 28:19. Another would be Mark 16:15, Matthew 16:18, Ephesians 4:11 through 13, Acts 1:8, and then finally 1 Timothy 3 and 1 Timothy 5. And these are key passages that address the church. So as we look at a process that helps us to come up with that model, we want to make sure that we address those issues, and you're going to see that this process that I'm going to present will do that.